She labored in silence day after day just to survive until a cowboy offered her a new life. She woke up before the sun, like she always did. The small alarm clock beside her bed buzzed softly in the dark, but she had already opened her eyes. Her body seemed to know the time on its own. The room was quiet, cold, and still, with only the sound of the wind brushing against the thin window. She lay there for a moment, staring at the cracked ceiling, gathering the strength to move. Every morning felt the same, heavy, slow, and filled with the weight of another long day. Her name was Clara, though very few people in town ever used it. Most just called her ma'am or didn't call her anything at all. She lived in a small rented room behind an old house near the edge of town. The paint on the walls had faded long ago, and the floor creaked under her steps. But it was all she could afford, and she kept it as clean as she could. A small table stood in the corner, holding a single cup, a plate, and a worn notebook she never wrote in anymore. Clara sat up and pulled her thin blanket closer around her shoulders. The cold always seemed to reach her bones, no matter the season. She slipped her feet into old shoes and stood slowly, her joints stiff from years of hard work. The mirror on the wall showed a tired face. Her eyes were still kind, but they held stories she never told. Her hair was pulled back in a simple tie, and a few gray strands had started to show, though she was not as old as she looked. She washed her face in the small sink, the water cold and sharp. It woke her up better than any coffee ever could. She didn't own a coffee maker anyway. Most mornings she ate a piece of bread or nothing at all. Today she found half an apple in her bag and took slow bites as she put on her jacket. The jacket had a small tear on one sleeve, but it still kept her warm enough. Outside, the town was quiet. The sky was painted in soft colors of early morning, pink and pale blue. The streets were empty except for a few stray dogs and the sound of a distant truck. Clara walked down the dirt road, her steps steady and silent. She had walked this path so many times that she could do it with her eyes closed. Her first job of the day was at a small diner near the center of town. It was an old place with faded signs and wooden tables that had been scratched and marked over the years. She worked in the back, washing dishes, wiping floors, and helping wherever she was needed. The owner, a tired man with a short temper, rarely spoke to her unless something went wrong. Still, Clara showed up every day on time without complaint. Inside the diner, the air smelled of frying oil and coffee. She tied an apron around her waist and got to work. Plates stacked up quickly, and her hands moved fast through the warm water. Her fingers were rough and red from years of scrubbing. Sometimes she watched the customers through the small window that looked into the dining area. People laughed, talked, and shared meals. Families sat together and friends leaned close to hear each other over the noise. Clara stayed in the back like a shadow. She didn't mind the work. What she minded was the quiet inside her chest, the silence that followed her everywhere. There was a time when her life was different. There was a time when she had dreams, plans, and someone who called her name with warmth instead of distance. But that time felt like another life now, far away and hard to remember clearly. When her shift ended, she wiped her hands on her apron and stepped back outside. The sun was higher now and the town had come to life. Cars passed by and people filled the sidewalks. Clara walked toward her next job, which was cleaning rooms at a small motel on the highway. The walk took about 20 minutes, and she used the time to rest her mind, letting her thoughts drift with the clouds. The motel was quiet during the day. Most guests were gone by morning, and new ones wouldn't arrive until evening. Clara cleaned each room carefully, changing sheets, wiping down tables, and emptying trash. Sometimes she found small things left behind, an old book, a scarf, or a toy. She always turned them in at the front desk, even though no one ever thanked her. As she worked, her back ached and her feet throbbed, but she kept going. She always did. There was rent to pay, food to buy, and no one else to depend on. She had learned a long time ago that the world did not stop for tired people. During her short lunch break, she sat on the steps behind the motel. She ate a small sandwich she had packed and watched cars rush past on the highway. She wondered where they were all going. Big cities, small towns, family homes, new starts. She imagined herself in one of those cars, looking out the window at a future she couldn't yet see. In the afternoon, she headed to her final job of the day. It was a private home on the other side of town, where she cleaned and helped an elderly woman who lived alone. The woman was kind but forgetful. Sometimes she told Clara the same stories again and again about her younger days and the love she had lost. Clara listened every time, nodding and smiling, even when she had heard the story before. By the time Clara finished, the sky was turning orange and purple. The day had slipped by like it always did. She walked back toward her small room, her steps slower now, her body heavy with tiredness. The town lights flickered on, and the air grew cooler. As she passed by the local store, she stopped to look at the window. Inside, people shopped for food, clothes, and things that made their lives easier or brighter. Clara counted the money in her pocket. It was just enough for bread, a can of soup, and maybe a small treat if she was lucky. She went inside, picked what she needed, and smiled politely at the cashier who barely looked up. Back in her room, Clara placed the food on the table and sat down. The quiet wrapped around her again. She ate slowly, savoring each bite. Afterward, she washed her plate and cup, then sat on her bed and took off her shoes. Her feet were sore and she rubbed them gently. She reached for the old notebook on the table. She opened it and flipped through blank pages. Once she had written in it every night. She had written about her hopes, her fears, and the life she wanted. But over time, the pages stayed empty. It became easier not to write, not to think, not to feel too much. That night, she stood by the window and looked out at the stars. The sky was clear and the stars were bright, like tiny lights in a sea of dark. Clara closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She only knew it would be another day of work, another day of silence, another day of surviving. But somewhere deep inside her, hidden under layers of tiredness and doubt, there was still a small, quiet spark. A feeling she couldn't explain. A sense that her story wasn't over yet. That maybe, just maybe, something different was waiting for her beyond the roads she walked every day. She turned off the light and lay down, pulling the blanket over her shoulders. The wind whispered outside the window, and the town slowly fell asleep. Clara closed her eyes, ready to rise again before the sun, unaware that her quiet, steady life was closer to change than she could ever imagine. The next morning began like all the others. Clara woke before the alarm, her eyes opening to the pale gray light that slipped through the thin curtains. For a moment, she lay still, listening to the soft sounds of the town waking up. A bird called from somewhere nearby, and a truck rumbled down the distant road. She pulled herself up slowly, feeling the familiar ache in her back and legs. She moved through her small room in quiet steps, careful not to make noise even though no one else was there. She washed her face, tied her hair back, and put on her worn jacket. The half-empty bag on the table reminded her to stop by the store later if she had any extra money. She didn't think she would, but hope had a way of showing up in small, stubborn thoughts. Outside, the air felt fresh and cool. The sky was light blue now, and the sun was just beginning to rise over the rooftops. Clara walked toward the diner, her hands tucked into her jacket pockets. As she passed the edge of town, she noticed something different. A large pickup truck was parked near the old fence by the road. It was dusty and worn, like it had traveled a long way. Beside it stood a man she had never seen before. He leaned against the truck, looking toward the open fields beyond the town. He wore a wide hat and boots that were marked with dirt and time. His jacket was simple but sturdy, and he carried himself with a quiet confidence. He didn't seem rushed, like everyone else in the mornings. He just stood there, breathing in the air as if he had all the time in the world. Clara slowed her steps without meaning to. She wasn't used to noticing people, and she wasn't used to being noticed. But when she walked past, the man turned his head and gave her a small, polite nod. His eyes were calm, not curious or judging, just kind. She nodded back quickly and kept walking, her heart beating a little faster than usual. She didn't know why. It wasn't fear. It was more like surprise. It had been a long time since someone had looked at her like she was really there. All through her shift at the diner, her mind kept drifting back to the man by the truck. She told herself it didn't matter. He was probably just passing through, like so many others who came and went. Still, when she stepped outside during her break, she glanced down the road, half expecting to see him again. He wasn't there. The day moved on as usual. She walked to the motel, cleaned the rooms, and ate her lunch on the steps. Cars rushed by on the highway, their sounds blending into a steady hum. She watched them and thought about how easy it seemed for some people to leave, to go somewhere new. She wondered what it felt like to wake up in a different place, to not know what the day would bring. In the afternoon, as she finished her work at the motel, the manager told her something that made her pause. "There's a ranch outside town," he said, leaning on the counter. "They're hiring for some help, Seasonal work might be good money. Clara thanked him, even though she didn't know what to say. She wasn't sure she was cut out for ranch work. She had spent her life cleaning, serving, and caring for others. The thought of open land, animals, and long days outside felt both exciting and frightening. She pushed the idea away and headed to her final job at the elderly woman's house. The woman greeted her with a warm smile and a story about her youth, just like always. Clara listened, nodded, and helped with the chores. The house felt peaceful, filled with old photos and soft light. When she left, the sun was low in the sky again. She walked down the main street, her steps slow and thoughtful. That was when she saw the truck again. It was parked near the small grocery store. The man stood by the door holding a paper bag of food. He spotted Clara as she approached and gave her the same small nod as before. "Evening," he said, his voice low and steady. "Evening," she replied, surprised by how quiet her own voice sounded. They stood there for a moment, neither of them in a hurry. The town moved around them, people walking past, a car honking in the distance, but it felt like the world had slowed down just a little. "I'm new in town," he said. "Name S. Luke." "Clara," she answered. Luke smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just an easy one. "Nice to meet you, Clara." She nodded, unsure of what else to say. Talking to strangers wasn't something she did often. "I'm working out at a ranch a few miles from here," he went on. "Just got in yesterday." She remembered what the motel manager had said earlier. "The ranch outside town?" "That's the one," Luke said. "They needed an extra hand." They walked a few steps together toward the edge of the store. Luke asked about the town, and Clara told him what little there was to tell. He listened closely, like every word mattered. It made her feel strange and warm at the same time. Before they parted, Luke reached into his bag and pulled out a small loaf of bread. "They gave me an extra by mistake," he said, holding it out to her. "You can take it." Clara hesitated. She wasn't used to being offered things. "I couldn't," she said. "Sure you can," he replied gently. "I don't need to." After a moment, she took it. "Thank you." "Any time," he said. That night, Clara sat in her room with the bread on the table. It felt like more than just food. It felt like a reminder that not everyone passed by without seeing her. Over the next few days, she began to see Luke more often. Sometimes he came into the diner for coffee in the mornings. Sometimes she spotted him in town, buying supplies or walking down the street with a slow, easy stride. Their conversation stayed simple. He asked how her day was. She asked about the ranch. He told her about the wide fields, the animals, and the quiet nights under open skies. She listened, imagining a place so different from her small room and narrow streets. One afternoon, he offered her a ride part of the way home. She almost said no out of habit, but her feet were tired, and something in his calm voice made her feel safe. The truck rumbled down the road, and Clara watched the town fade behind them. For a moment, she felt like she was leaving her life behind, even if it was only for a short drive. When he dropped her off, she thanked him again. He tipped his hat slightly and smiled. "See you around, Clara," he said. "See you," she replied. As she walked back to her room, she felt something new stirring inside her. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was more like a door opening just a crack, a small space where something different might step in. That night she picked up her old notebook. Her hands hesitated over the blank page. Then slowly she wrote one simple sentence. "Today I met someone who saw me." She closed the notebook and lay down, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in a long while, her thoughts didn't feel so heavy. The silence in her chest wasn't quite as loud. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, and the stars shone quietly above the town. Clara didn't know what Luke would mean in her life. She didn't know where the road he had come from might lead. But she knew one thing. For the first time in years, she was starting to look forward to tomorrow. The next few days felt different for Clara, even though her routine stayed the same. She still woke before the sun, still walked the same dusty roads, and still worked until her body felt heavy and slow. But now her thoughts didn't stay trapped in the quiet space inside her chest. They wandered. They drifted toward the ranch outside town, toward the wide fields Luke had described, toward the calm way he spoke and listened. One morning at the diner, the owner called her into the front. That alone made her nervous. He rarely spoke to her unless something was wrong. "Clara," he said, rubbing his forehead, "business has been slow. I won't need you every day anymore, maybe 3 days a week at most." The words hit her harder than she expected. She stood there, nodding slowly, trying to keep her face calm. "I understand," she said. He gave a short nod and turned away, already thinking about something else. Clara went back to the sink, but her hands shook as she picked up the next plate. 3 days a week meant less money. Less money meant harder choices. She tried to push the worry away, but it stayed with her, heavy and close. At the motel, things didn't go much better. The manager told her that some rooms would be closed for repairs. They wouldn't need as much cleaning help for a while. By the time Clara walked toward the elderly woman's house that afternoon, her head felt full of numbers and questions. Rent, food, the small savings she barely had. Everything seemed to line up in a way that left no room for mistakes. The elderly woman noticed the change right away. "You're quiet today," she said gently. Clara smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just tired." The woman patted her hand. "We all get tired, dear, but don't forget to rest your heart, too." Clara nodded, though she wasn't sure how to do that. That evening, she walked past the grocery store and saw Luke's truck parked nearby. He stood by the door, talking to the cashier, holding a bag of feed over his shoulder. When he spotted Clara, his face brightened. "Hey," he called out, "you look like you could use a ride." She almost laughed at how true that felt. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the road stretching out ahead of them. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and blue, and the air felt calm. "You okay?" Luke asked. Clara hesitated. She wasn't used to answering that question honestly. "I might be losing some of my work," she said quietly. Luke didn't rush to speak. He just nodded like he understood more than she had said. "That's rough." They drove a little farther before he spoke again. "The ranch is still looking for help, not just for outside work. They need someone to help in the main house too, cooking, cleaning, keeping things running." Clara's heart beat faster. "I don't know if I could do that." Luke glanced at her. "From what I've seen, you already do that kind of work, just in a lot harder ways." She didn't answer, but his words stayed with her. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind outside. The walls of her small room felt closer than ever. She thought about the ranch, about wide open land and quiet nights under the stars, about the chance to earn steady money to breathe a little easier. But fear held her back. She had lived in this town for so long. It was all she knew. The thought of leaving felt like stepping off the edge of something tall and unseen. The next morning, she found an envelope taped to her door. Inside was a note from the motel manager. They wouldn't need her at all for the next 2 weeks. Clara sat on her bed and held the paper in her hands. The room felt very quiet. Her heart felt heavy and fast at the same time. She went to the diner, but they didn't need her that day either. She walked back through town, not sure where she was going, until she found herself standing at the edge of the road that led out toward the fields. She didn't know why, but she started walking. The road was long and dusty, lined with tall grass that moved gently in the wind. The town faded behind her, replaced by open land and wide sky. After a while, she saw fences and barns in the distance. The ranch. She stopped at the gate, unsure if she should go any farther. The place felt big and quiet, like it held its own kind of world inside its fences. She turned to leave, but a voice called out. "Clara!" She turned and saw Luke walking toward her, a look of surprise on his face. "I didn't know you'd come out here," he said. "I didn't either," she admitted. He smiled slightly. "Come on, I'll show you around." They walked through the gate together. The ranch was even bigger up close. Horses moved slowly in the fields. A few workers went about their tasks, calling out to each other. The air smelled like earth and hay. "This is where I stay," Luke said, pointing to a small building near the main house. "And that's the house they need help with." Clara looked at the large porch and wide windows. It felt like another world compared to her small room in town. A woman stepped out onto the porch. She was older, with silver hair and kind eyes. "This is Mrs. Harris," Luke said. "She runs the place." Mrs. Harris smiled at Clara. "You must be the one Luke's been telling me about." Clara blinked. "He has. He says you work harder than anyone he knows, Mrs. Harris said warmly. "We could use someone like that here." They talked for a while. Mrs. Harris explained the work, the hours, and the pay. It was more than Clara had ever earned before. There would be a small room for her to stay in, meals included. Clara felt like she was listening to a dream. "I need time to think," she said softly. "Of course," Mrs. Harris replied. "The door's open." Luke walked her back to the gate. "No pressure," he said, "but I think you'd fit in here." Clara looked back at the ranch one last time before heading down the road. That night, she packed a small bag, just in case. The next morning, she went to the diner and told the owner she might not be able to come back. He barely looked up. At the elderly woman's house, she said goodbye. The woman held her hands and smiled. Sometimes, dear, life gives us a push when we're too afraid to move. Clara walked back to her room, looked at the walls, the table, the empty notebook. She realized that this place had kept her safe, but it had also kept her still. By sunset, Luke's truck pulled up outside. She took one last look at the town, then climbed into the passenger seat. As the truck rolled down the road, the sky opened wide in front of her. Clara felt scared. She felt unsure. But for the first time in her life, she also felt brave. And that made all the difference. The truck moved steadily down the long road, and Clara watched the town disappear behind them. The buildings grew smaller, the streets faded into dust, and soon there was only open land on both sides. Fields stretched far into the distance, and the sky felt wider than she had ever seen before. Her hands rested in her lap, and her heart beat fast in her chest. Luke kept his eyes on the road, giving her space to think. The sound of the engine and the soft wind through the open window filled the quiet between them. Clara wasn't sure what she felt most, fear, hope, or something in between. She had left behind everything she knew with just one small bag and a brave step into the unknown. When they reached the ranch, the sun was low in the sky, painting the fields in warm colors. The air smelled fresh, like grass and earth. Mrs. Harris was waiting on the porch, a gentle smile on her face. "I'm glad you came back," she said. Clara nodded, unable to find the right words. Luke helped her carry her bag inside. The room she was given was simple but clean. A small bed, a wooden chair, and a window that looked out over the fields. It felt bigger than her old place, and lighter too, as if the air itself had more room to move. That first night, Clara didn't sleep much. The ranch was quiet in a way she wasn't used to. There were no distant cars, no town noises, just the soft sounds of the wind and the animals outside. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what she had done. There was no turning back now. The next morning came early. Mrs. Harris knocked gently on her door. "Time to start the day," she said kindly. Clara dressed quickly and stepped outside. The morning air was cool, and the sun was just rising over the fields. Workers were already moving about, feeding animals and carrying tools. The ranch felt alive, like a world that never truly slept. Her first tasks were inside the main house. She helped in the kitchen, learning where everything was kept. She cleaned floors, dusted shelves, and washed dishes. It was work she knew well, but here it felt different. People thanked her, they smiled. They asked how she was doing. At lunch, she sat at a long table with the other workers. At first, she stayed quiet, listening more than speaking. But a few of them started talking to her, asking where she was from, how long she had been in town, what brought her to the ranch. She answered in simple words, feeling shy but not invisible. Luke sat across from her. He didn't say much, but when their eyes met, he gave her a small smile. It made her feel steady, like she wasn't alone in this new place. The days that followed were hard. Clara's body ached in ways it never had before. Even though her main work was inside, she often helped outside too, carrying water, helping with animals, or moving supplies. The sun could be hot and the work could be heavy. At night, she fell into bed tired and sore, but there was something different about this tiredness. It felt honest. It felt like she was building something instead of just surviving. Still, doubt crept in during the quiet moments. She wondered if she really belonged here. Everyone else seemed to know what they were doing, where they fit. She felt like a guest in someone else's life, walking carefully, afraid to step in the wrong place. One afternoon, she made a small mistake in the kitchen and dropped a tray of dishes. The sound echoed through the room. Her heart jumped into her throat. She froze, waiting for anger, for harsh words, for the kind of looks she had known before. But Mrs. Harris simply walked over and helped her pick up the pieces. "Everyone drops something now and then," she said softly. "What matters is that you keep going." Clara felt her eyes burn, but she blinked the feeling away. She nodded and kept working. That evening she sat on the porch alone, watching the sky turn pink and gold. The fields glowed in the soft light, and the animals moved slowly, settling in for the night. Luke joined her, holding 2 cups of warm tea. "Thought you might like this," he said, handing her one. "Thank you," she replied. They sat in silence for a while, sipping the tea. "Hard day?" Luke asked. She nodded. "Every day feels hard. I keep wondering if I made the right choice." He looked out at the fields. "I wonder that, too, about a lot of things." Clara turned to him. "Really, you always seem so sure." He gave a small laugh. "That's just how it looks." Truth is, I came out here because I didn't know what else to do. I needed a place to breathe, to think. His honesty surprised her. It made him feel more real, more like her. They talked for a long time, sharing pieces of their past without going too deep. Enough to understand each other, enough to know they weren't alone in feeling lost sometimes. As the weeks passed, Clara slowly found her rhythm. She learned the names of the workers, the habits of the animals, the way the ranch moved through each day. She laughed more, even if it was just a small laugh at first. But not everything was easy. One day, a letter arrived from town. It was from her old landlord, reminding her about the room she had left behind and the money she still owed. The words on the page felt heavy in her hands. The past had reached out and touched her again. That night she couldn't sleep. The old worries came back, whispering that she didn't deserve this new life, that it was only a matter of time before it slipped away. The next morning, Mrs. Harris noticed something was wrong. "Want to talk about it?" she asked gently. Clara hesitated, then handed her the letter. Mrs. Harris read it and nodded slowly. "Life doesn't always let go of us right away," she said. "But that doesn't mean we can't move forward." She offered to help Clara make a plan, to figure out how to handle the debt little by little. It wasn't a miracle, but it was a hand reaching out instead of turning away. Clara felt something shift inside her. She wasn't carrying everything alone anymore. Later that day, Luke found her by the fence watching the horses. "You okay?" he asked. She told him about the letter, about the fear that had followed her from town. He listened quietly. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "And you don't have to do this by yourself." His words stayed with her. That night, Clara stood by her window and looked out at the stars. They seemed closer here, brighter and clearer. She thought about the woman she had been in the small room in town, counting coins and walking silent roads. She was still that woman, but she was also becoming someone new. The ranch hadn't solved all her problems. Life was still uncertain. The future was still a wide, open road she couldn't see to the end of. But now, when she felt tired, there were people who noticed. When she felt afraid, there were voices that reminded her she wasn't alone. Clara lay down in her bed, listening to the quiet sounds of the night. Her body ached, her mind was full, but her heart felt a little lighter. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving the days. She was starting to live them. The seasons began to change at the ranch, and Clara noticed it in small, quiet ways. The mornings grew cooler, and the sky carried a softer light. The fields shifted from bright green to warm shades of gold and brown. The wind felt different too, like it carried stories from faraway places. Clara found herself standing outside more often, just breathing in the open air and letting the wide world settle into her heart. Her days were still full of work, but now they felt balanced. She knew where everything belonged in the kitchen. She could move through the house without thinking, her hands steady and sure. She had learned how to help with the animals, how to carry water, how to tie simple knots, and how to move carefully around the horses. The ranch no longer felt like a place she was visiting. It felt like a place she belonged. The other workers had become familiar faces, even friends. They shared stories during meals, laughed about small mistakes, and helped each other when the days were long. Clara found herself smiling more without trying. Her laughter came easier now, light and natural instead of shy and quiet. Luke was still there too, steady as ever. Sometimes they worked near each other, sometimes they only crossed paths at meals or in the evenings. Their conversations stayed simple, but there was comfort in them. They talked about the weather, the work, and the little moments that made the days feel full. Every now and then they shared something deeper, a memory, a hope, a question about the future. One evening they sat on the fence and watched the sun sink below the fields. The sky turned soft pink and deep orange, and the world seemed to slow down. "I never thought I'd stay this long," Luke said quietly. Clara looked at him. "Me neither." They both smiled at that. As time passed, Clara began to notice changes in herself. She stood a little taller. Her steps felt stronger. Her reflection in the window showed a face that still carried tired lines, but now there was light in her eyes too. She wasn't just getting through the days anymore. She was building something, confidence, peace, and a sense of worth she had never fully known. One afternoon, Mrs. Harris called Clara into the main room. "I've been meaning to talk to you," she said. Clara's heart beat faster, old worries rising out of habit. She stood still, waiting. "You've done wonderful work here," Mrs. Harris continued. "You care about this place, and it shows. I'd like you to take on more responsibility, help manage the house, train new workers when they arrive." This could be a long-term position if you'd like it. For a moment, Clara couldn't speak. The words felt too big, too bright to hold. You mean stay? She finally asked. Mrs. Harris smiled. If that's what you want. Clara nodded, her throat tight. It is. That night, she walked outside and looked up at the stars. They were scattered across the sky like tiny lights, just as bright as they had been on her first night at the ranch. But now, everything felt different. The fear that once filled her chest had softened. In its place was something warm and steady. She thought about her old room in town, the quiet streets, the long days of walking alone. That life felt like a distant memory now, not because it didn't matter, but because it had led her here. A few days later, she received another letter from town. This time, it was shorter. Her old landlord wrote to say the room had been rented to someone else, and the small debt she owed had been settled through a local support group that Mrs. Harris had quietly reached out to. The past, which had once felt like a heavy chain, finally loosened its hold. Clara held the letter in her hands and felt tears gather in her eyes. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release. She found Luke near the barn and showed him the letter. Looks like things are finally turning your way, he said. Feels like it, she replied. That evening, the workers gathered for a simple meal outside. Someone had set up a small fire, and the air was filled with the smell of warm food and soft laughter. Clara sat among them, listening to the sound of voices and the crackle of the fire. At one point, Mrs. Harris stood up and raised her cup. To new beginnings, she said. Everyone lifted their cups and repeated the words. Clara felt them settle deep in her heart. Later, as the night grew quiet, she and Luke walked along the edge of the field. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a gentle light over the land. Do you ever think about what comes next? Clara asked. All the time, Luke said. But I've learned something. You don't have to see the whole road, just the next step. She nodded. That made sense to her. The next morning, Clara woke up with the sun instead of before it. The light filled her room, warm and soft. She lay there for a moment, listening to the sounds of the ranch waking up. The distant call of voices, the movement of animals, the wind through the grass. She got up, dressed, and stepped outside. The world felt wide and open, full of possibility. As she walked toward the main house, she passed the gate where she had once stood, unsure and afraid. She paused there, remembering the woman she had been that day. The woman who had carried her life in a small bag and a brave choice. She smiled to herself and kept walking. Throughout the day, she moved through her work with ease. She guided a new worker through the kitchen, showing them where things were kept. She helped organize supplies. She answered questions, offered encouragement, and laughed when something went wrong. In the afternoon, she took a short break and sat under a tree near the fields. The wind brushed through the leaves above her and the sky stretched wide and blue. She pulled out her old notebook from her bag. The pages were no longer blank. She had started writing again, not every day, but often. She wrote about the ranch, the people, the way the stars looked at night. She wrote about fear and courage, about how life could change when you least expected it. She turned to a new page and wrote, I used to think my life was only about surviving. Now I know it can be about becoming. That evening, as the sun set once more, Clara stood on the porch and watched the fields glow. Luke joined her, leaning against the railing. You look like you found your place, he said. She thought about it for a moment. I think I've found myself, she replied. He smiled. The ranch settled into its quiet night. The stars came out one by one, lighting up the sky. The world felt calm, steady, and full of promise. Clara stood there, breathing in the cool air, feeling the ground solid beneath her feet. Her life wasn't perfect. There were still challenges, still unknowns waiting down the road, but she wasn't afraid of them anymore. She had learned that strength could grow in the quietest places. That kindness could change the direction of a life. And that sometimes all it took was one moment, one person, and one brave step to turn survival into something more. As the night deepened, Clara turned toward the house, toward the warmth and light inside. She carried with her the past that had shaped her, the present that held her, and the future that waited, wide and open, just beyond the horizon.